Formatting. When you're talking about formatting, preferably you do it before you add the data, but that is not always the case. Rest assured that whether it's done before or after, it's still going to work. It's just a matter of habits. It makes it a lot easier for you to just do it before. One other nice thing about your Excel knowledge is that it's going to be reused. You're already comfortable using commas, conditional formatting, text, fonts, all those things are already readily available for you, whether they're within Excel on your Home tab or the Power Pivot, as we saw in the ribbon. And there's an added value here, added there, that's readily available for you whenever you click on your column in Power Pivot. Show values as. It'll give you a variety of methods in which you can format it, as we will see in the next demo. Let's start by opening Excel, going to our blank workbook, into Power Pivot, and connecting to Access. By now, this all should be familiar to you. Let's select Access, and from your module, Basics, choose Northwind. Let's test. Making good habits, test always, never hurts. Click Next button. And let's, as usual, choose Order Details as our base of operations, including all the selected related tables. Let's click on Finish. All the rows have been added successfully, a total of 4, and they're here available. Now let's go into Excel and insert our pivot table, remembering to choose our existing connection and opening it in a new worksheet. Let's collapse everything by clicking on your drop down here, and let's start by adding from Order Details our quantity, our unit price, and then scrolling down to choose our product name. There we go. As we notice, we have, for the unit prices, it's properly formatted, and our sum of quantity is properly formatted too, but it doesn't have commas. Let's go and take care of that first. You can click on the column and notice that we're in Home, not necessarily in Power Pivot, but you can still take advantage of it. So click on comma. Notice that we have added already by default the 2 decimal points. Let's remove them, leaving only the commas and scrolling down. That does look better. Now, what else can we do here that can add some nice additional values to it? We could explore in our ribbon and see what else can we add in here. Okay, let's click there, conditional formatting. Let's play with the data bars. Notice what happens here. It added somewhat of a data bar there, but it's almost full. What I forgot to do was select my column. Now let's go back into formatting. Notice what happens when I do that. We have gradient fills there and solid fills. If you hover over others, you'll see that there are many other patterns to choose from. You could also choose color scales. For the moment, let's just select the green one to add a little bit of appeal and scroll down to see what happens when we have the entire amount. It's almost full. Okay, there's just one of the multiple items we could do as formatting. We also mentioned before that we could right-click on a column or even a cell, and we can do the following. You can set it to no calculation, % of grand total, % of column total, row total, there's a variety of other items that you could do here. And even if you click on more options, there will be even more. Summarizing values, these formulas, sum, count, average, max, min, standard deviations. There's multiple that you can select from and choose. And much easier, organized visual appeal. Now, this is what we're looking at formatting. What else could we do? If we go back into Power Pivot, we can look at the ribbon and see if there's anything we would want to do. Maybe align vertically, horizontally, or looking at other choices that we have in here. For design, we want to do banded rows. Let's go into our Power Pivot and choose what would look like if we chose a medium formatting. Maybe it's not that appealing. How about this one? Notice that it changed. We added some coloring, making it a lot more easier on the eye. We can choose many of these types. And one of the things you have to keep in mind is it really is up to you as the designer in this case to make it look comfortable, readable, accessible, and your target audience. Who is it going to be used by? Keep all those factors in mind. Sometimes colors can be your friend, but also they can be your enemies. These colors are not too hard on the eyes, yet they add some visual appeal. You could have row headers, hide them, column headers. As you notice, we just lost one of the banded rows. Sometimes that might be a corporate policy as well. Banded columns. The possibilities are really up to you. Even grand totals can be enabled or disabled, as you notice here, and report layouts. Notice there's a variety of items that you can really choose from, and it is encouraged for you to continue exploring these. We have just touched the tip of the iceberg in a few of these, and we will continue to do so the more we move into other topics. Okay, calculated fields. Calculated fields, if you haven't heard from it, they were known before as measures. That was for Power Pivot 2010. If not for Power Pivot 2013, no need to worry about it. The things you should keep in mind with calculated fields are that they should be unique. Why? Because of their reusability, it is not a good idea to name them the same way multiple times. You're going to have problems, particularly when you use them or reuse them across your workbooks. That might be a Power Pivot table, a Power Pivot chart, even Power Query. It might cause ambiguity not only for Power Pivot, but for yourself. You might find yourself scratching your head and wondering, which one was this supposed to refer to? And if you're going to be wondering that, can you imagine what it'll do to Power Pivot? Your formulas are going to be probably having problems, and they're not going to be accurate, which is something we definitely want to avoid. These could be explicit and implicit. What does this mean? Implicit are less overhead, but they are mostly used within your Excel area. Explicit are usually defined in your Power Pivot area. The difference between these two areas is that whatever is in Excel is considered more to be formula-like, while explicit in Power Pivot is akin to you going into a relational database or your original source and what row by row adding the values and having them be calculated. In other words, explicit will always be having a larger footprint than implicit. Also, often used in values, that's what it's also referred of a Power Pivot or chart. Calculated fields are always used that way. So you can reuse them. They have high reusability, which is a good thing. Let's go ahead and take a look at what a calculated field would look like. So our calculated field would be defined, as mentioned before, in our Excel area. This is our Excel area, or our worksheet. And they could be easily defined such as B4 times C4, copying it all around. There we go. Notice that that was easily said and done, and you also were very familiar. You didn't get lost in what happened in the process. Now, what would happen if we wanted to determine how big this file has changed since the beginning? Well, there's one easy way. Let's create a new workbook, Excel workbook. Call it blank. Let's open it and just save it. And now let's close it. Let's go back to Explorer and notice the footprint. It is 8K. Now, let's save this newly created workbook. And let's name it Calculated Field. Let's click Save. Now let's see how much the footprint changed. Notice, while not tremendous, there is a difference. 670K is not considered by any means now substantial, but it is a lot larger than what it used to be. Keep that in mind when you're creating your calculated fields. They will add some overhead in your workbook. Calculated columns. These as calculated fields should be unique within a table. The difference is that they're done with what's called DAX, data analysis expressions. And these are done in the Power Pivot area. They are also resource intensive, a lot more resource intensive. Why? Calculated columns are created with DAX, data analysis expressions. These are done also in your Power Pivot area. They are also more resource intensive and calculated for each row in a table. What this means is it is going back as if you were modifying your relational database. Whichever source you pulled it from is the equivalent of going back in there and if you were doing it manually. Therefore, it adds more overhead and it shows in your footprint. Just keep that in mind whenever you're going to be sharing. If it's going to be something tremendous amount of data, you might have problems porting it, sharing it around, etc. Those are one of the few things you have to keep in mind. Also, how do you want to have them made available? In other words, do you want them to show up in a Power Pivot table, Power Pivot chart? Those are things you have to keep in mind when using calculated columns. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we would create a calculated column. Okay, let's go ahead and create a calculated column. As mentioned before, I kept on discussing and mentioning the Power Pivot area. Well, we're already familiar with the Excel area. Now we have to go into the Power Pivot one. To do that, we click on Power Pivot and Manage. Notice this is the Power Pivot area. Well, what do we want to do here? Adding a column would be called the calculated column here. So we want to add one. What should we do? We go ahead and click inside any of these cells in where we want to add in the area, and we type equal, and we start with a bracket. Notice what happens. We immediately get the names of the existing columns within our order details. We can choose quantity and continue from there. We re-choose quantity and we add another column. Well, which one should we choose? Let's stick on to calculated column 1 and multiply this by the quantity and the unit price. We have somewhere around here the U. Here we go. Choose it. Notice what happened immediately. It was modified to and from the formula. So it's exactly what we're looking for. Do we need this column? You right click on it and delete it. Naming convention. What is a good idea to do here? What is the result? This is what is exactly the process that we're trying to achieve. It was the quantity times unit price. Naming it like that. Not a problem. What happened here? What did we just do? We just added a calculated column. Will it show in our Power Pivot table if we switch back into Excel? Let's find out if that's the case. We click on the Power Pivot table and move around. Notice it's there. It wasn't there before. And if we move upwards here, this calculated field did not show up in here. And that's what we're referring to. An explicit calculated column will be available when you are adding it into your Power Pivot area. Well, we've discussed before how much impact of a footprint it can have. If we go back here, we know that a calculated field is using this amount of space. Let's save this and see what happens to the reflection of how much different it would be with a calculated column now. So we're saving it. And let's take a look at the numbers. It took a little bit longer if you notice. Not much, but there is the value. Will it increase the more data you have? Yes. It will keep on growing and increasing until it finds it appropriately to do so. Hiding and refreshing your data. You're already familiar how to do it in Excel, the same for refreshing. So what do you want to refresh? Data. You can hide data too. Calculations. Why would you want to do that? Maybe there's just something you want to keep internally known as, or it's just something for your own useful purposes, but you don't want anybody else to see it. It can be easily done through the Excel and even Power Pivot area as well. Let's take a moment and look at a demo of how we would hide data calculations within Excel and or our Power Pivot area in the workbook. So we already have our columns created here. This one we did not name. It's a calculated field. Let's call it quantity times price. Well, we're not going to be using it. Why? Because we already have a calculated one here. But just for the sake of matter, let's call it appropriately calculated field underscore, and let's hide it. We could do that here, hide, and it's gone. We know because there's a missing column in here. That's easily said and done from there. But what if we want to do it within Power Pivot? What if we wanted to hide one of these fields? Let's right click, and it's called hide too, but just a tad differently. Notice it's called hide from client tools. Why would we want to do this? Well, let's look at all the columns that are here. When we did the import, we did not take the time to think things entirely through. We just imported all the columns. Nothing wrong with that. We were in a hurry. But now that we're thinking things through and analyzing them, we're wondering, should I have done that? We have the ID, the order, the product quantity, and unit price and discounts. For the moment, I'm really not needing the data allocated. So if I right-click and hide it, what will the effect be in our Power Pivot table? Let's switch back and take a look at it. Click on the Power Pivot and notice it's not in there. That is how we would hide it. Is there any other way we could do things? Well, we could do it and apply it to all the other columns in there. One other thing that you probably noticed was when I switched from a column that was not Power Pivot table to one that is, look what happens. Your real estate can be reused and is reused automatically. One of the nice other things to keep in there. When it comes to refreshing your data, you're probably thinking, where should I do that, or how does that happen? You're most likely already familiar with one of the settings that you use a Power Pivot frequently. If we click on our pivot table, you most likely see at the bottom what is called a Defer Layout Update. It's usually best to leave it unchecked for the following reasons. First, it's going to update automatically any changes you make on the Power Pivot area back into Excel. That doesn't mean you have to, it's just a matter of personal preferences. If you check it, what's going to happen is you're going to be needing to update it depending on the frequency of your changes. Notice it's simple and it's not that difficult to really complete that process. I'm going to go back and leave it unchecked so that we can continue our refreshing journey here. So that is one of the settings to keep in mind. The other one, if you click on Power Pivot and go into the Power Pivot area, we will see that in the Home tab, we can click Refresh. And there are two items. Just Refresh, which will just take care of the current tab that we are located at. And the other one is Refresh All, which will update all of our tabs. Why would you need to do this? Think of it from this point of view. You just retrieve your data from SQL Server, and this is just an example. But the database is updated every hour or every 30 minutes. During the course of you importing the data and the time that it was updated, there might be some new records. Doesn't mean that your calculations are off. They just need to be updated, as mentioned before. Why? There is more data waiting for you to be processed and displayed in your workbook. That's the reason to refresh the entire workbook completely. Sometimes you might just do it at the end of the day. It really depends on what is best for you and your work processes. No right or wrong in that area, but it's something to contemplate when wanting to access your data. The other item to look into is moving into your advanced or design options. Why? The ribbon will show you one in particular, calculation options. When we click on it, notice it's set to automatic calculation mode. This is regarding your calculated fields and columns. If we set it to manual, notice that nothing really happens. If you set it to calculate now, it's going to go and update all the calculated columns that were there. One more thing to keep in mind is it's really up to you, once more, how you prefer to work. Personally, my preference is just to leave everything to update automatically so I don't have to be coming back and rethinking what is missing or what have I not done correctly. But it is just one way. Everybody works differently and everybody has their own set of work processes that they use in the daily routine. That is one of the ways to take care of how to update your process. The last one is going back into your home or into Power Pivot and click Update All. This one just tells you there are no changes to be made because we already took care of them, and honestly we did not change the data. So this is not an error, just an informational warning, putting it that way. That is how you would refresh your data within Power Pivot.